The rain had been falling since before dawn, heavy and cold, soaking the empty parking lot outside the office building. Most people had already gone home hours ago. Only one light was still on at the far end of the floor. The single dad had not planned to stay late. He was supposed to pick up his daughter from his neighbor's place, warm up leftovers, and help her finish a spelling worksheet. But his boss had asked for one last report. "Just 10 more minutes," she said. 10 minutes turned into an hour. When he finally shut down his computer and stood up, his lower back ached. He grabbed his jacket and headed toward the elevator, tired but relieved the day was over. That was when he saw her. She was lying on the floor near the stairwell door. At first, he thought she had slipped. Then he noticed how still she was. Too still. Her purse had fallen open, papers scattered across the floor. Her phone buzzed once, then went quiet. His heart dropped. He rushed over and knelt beside her. "Ma'am?" he said softly, afraid to shout and afraid not to. No response. He checked her breathing the way he once learned in a workplace safety training. It was shallow. Her skin felt cold. Her eyes were closed, her face pale under the harsh hallway lights. Panic tried to take over, but he pushed it down. He pulled out his phone and called emergency services with shaking hands. As he spoke, he gently turned her on her side, just like they instructed. The operator stayed on the line until help arrived. When the ambulance finally came, flashing red lights filled the building lobby. Paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher. One of them asked who he was. "I work here," he said. "She's my supervisor." They nodded and rushed her out. He stood there alone afterward, soaked from the rain he hadn't even noticed walking through. His hands were still shaking. He didn't know if she would be okay. He didn't know that this moment would change his life. The next morning, his phone rang before sunrise. He was in the kitchen, tying his daughter's shoelaces before school. When he saw the unknown number, he almost ignored it. Then he answered. "Is this you?" a stern voice asked. "Yes," he said carefully. "This is the police department. We need you to come in for questioning." His stomach dropped. "Questioning about what?" There was a pause. "About your boss." The line went dead. His daughter looked up at him, confused. "Dad, what's wrong?" He forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just grown-up stuff." But inside, fear spread fast. By the time he arrived at the station, his hands were sweating again. He kept thinking about the night before. He replayed every second in his mind, wondering if he had done something wrong. At the front desk, an officer asked for his name, then nodded and gestured him toward a bench. "You're being detained," the officer said calmly. Detained. The word echoed in his head. He didn't resist when they asked him to stand. He didn't argue when they placed handcuffs on his wrists. He knew how things could go. He kept his voice steady, his movements slow. People stared as he was led down the hallway. In a small interview room, they removed the cuffs but left the door locked. 2 detectives entered. One of them opened a folder filled with papers. "Your boss was found unconscious last night," the detective said. "She's currently in the hospital." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm the one who called for help." The other detective leaned forward. "She claims she doesn't remember what happened. But there were no cameras in the stairwell. And you were the last person seen working late." He swallowed hard. "I didn't hurt her. We're just asking questions," the detective said. But his tone felt heavy. They asked him about his schedule, his relationship with his boss, whether there had ever been tension, whether he'd argued with her, whether he needed money, whether he had a temper. Each question felt like a weight added to his chest. "I'm just an employee," he said. "I stay late because I need the overtime. I have a child." The detectives exchanged a look. "Until we sort this out," one of them said, "you'll be held." Held. He thought of his daughter waiting for him at school. In a quiet hospital room across town, his boss slowly opened her eyes. The world came back in pieces. White ceiling. Soft beeping. A dull ache in her head. A nurse noticed and smiled. "You're awake." "You're safe." She tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. The nurse handed her water. "You collapsed at work. A coworker found you and called for help." Her brow furrowed. "Who?" The nurse checked the chart. "One of your employees." Something tightened in her chest. Images flickered through her mind. A man standing over her. Bright lights, panic, fear she couldn't fully explain. "What's his name?" she asked. The nurse hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm allowed." "I need to know," she said sharply. Later that morning, a police officer stood beside her bed. He asked her to describe what she remembered. She closed her eyes. Her memory felt broken, like glass. She remembered stress. Long nights, pressure. She remembered feeling dizzy. And she remembered waking up on the floor, seeing a figure nearby. Fear filled in the gaps. "I think," she said slowly, "I think he did something to me." The officer nodded and wrote it down. That single sentence changed everything. Back in the holding room, the single dad stared at the wall. He had saved her life. He knew that. But no one was asking about that. They were looking at him like a problem, like a threat, like a story they already believed. He thought about his daughter again, about how he promised her he would always come home, about how he worked so hard just to keep things normal. He had done the right thing. So why did it feel like everything was about to be taken from him? The holding cell was colder than he expected. The single dad sat on the narrow bench, his hands resting on his knees. The walls were gray and bare, with nothing to look at except the small metal door. Time felt slow, stretched thin, like it was punishing him. He kept thinking about the same question. Why would she say that? He had found her unconscious. He had called for help. He had stayed until the ambulance came. He hadn't touched her except to turn her on her side, so she could breathe. Yet here he was. An officer finally opened the door. "You're being transferred," he said. "Transferred where?" the dad asked. "For further processing." The officer didn't meet his eyes. At the hospital, his boss stared at the ceiling long after the officer left. Her head still hurt. The room smelled like disinfectant. Machines hummed softly beside her bed. Everyone kept saying she was lucky to be alive, but she didn't feel lucky. She felt afraid. Her memory was full of holes. She remembered feeling dizzy in the hallway. She remembered trying to reach her phone. Then nothing, just darkness, and then a man standing over her. She didn't remember his face clearly, only his shape, his voice maybe. Or maybe that part was her mind filling in blanks. The idea that someone might have hurt her scared her more than the pain in her head. And fear made her hold on to the one thing that felt solid: suspicion. Back at the station, the single dad was placed in another room. This one had a camera in the corner and a metal table bolted to the floor. A different detective walked in, older, quieter. He sat down and opened a file. "You understand why you're here," the detective said. "Yes," the dad replied. "But I didn't do anything wrong." The detective studied him for a moment. "Tell me again what happened last night." So he did. He explained how he stayed late, how he was heading out, how he saw her on the floor, how scared he was when she didn't respond, how he called for help right away. He spoke slowly, carefully. "I could have left," he said. "No one would have known, but I didn't." The detective tapped his pen. "Why not?" He looked down. "Because I'd want someone to help my daughter if she was ever alone." The room went quiet. The detective leaned back. "You don't have a record," he said. "No complaints. No history of violence." "Because I'm not that person," the dad said. Still, the detective closed the file without saying much else. Across town, a doctor spoke gently to the boss. "Your test results show severe exhaustion," the doctor said. "Extreme stress. Dehydration. That alone could explain the collapse." She frowned. "But what about him?" "There's no physical evidence that suggests an attack," the doctor said carefully. "No signs of harm." Her hands tightened under the blanket. If there was no attack, then why did she feel so certain something was wrong? That evening, the single dad was released on temporary hold. "You're not free," the officer told him. "You're just not being kept overnight." He nodded. Outside, the sky was dark. His phone buzzed with missed calls and messages. One from the school. One from his neighbor. He called back immediately. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice cracking. "Please tell her I'm coming." When he finally reached his daughter, she ran into his arms. "Where were you?" she asked. "I had to take care of something," he said, holding her tight. "I'm here now." But even as he said it, he knew things were far from over. The next day, news spread quietly through the office. People whispered. Glances followed him down hallways. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Someone had been arrested. Someone important had been hurt, and he fit the story too easily. His boss watched security footage later that afternoon. The camera outside the stairwell showed him entering the hallway. Minutes later, paramedics arrived. The footage didn't show what happened inside. It showed him standing there afterward, soaked, shaking, waiting. She felt a strange ache in her chest. That didn't look like guilt, it looked like fear. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed everything again and again. The pressure at work, the long hours, the way she pushed herself too far, the way she barely noticed the people around her unless something went wrong. She remembered how he always stayed late, how he never complained, how he always talked about his child. A thought crept in slowly, quietly. What if he had saved her? And what if her fear had ruined his life? Meanwhile, the single dad sat at his kitchen table after his daughter fell asleep. He stared at the paperwork the police had given him. Words he barely understood. Deadlines, warnings, all because he stopped to help. He looked toward his daughter's room and whispered to himself, "I did the right thing," but the world didn't seem to agree. Not yet. The letter arrived on a Monday morning. The single dad stood at his kitchen counter, holding the envelope with shaking fingers. His daughter was eating cereal, humming softly to herself, unaware of the storm building just a few feet away. The letter was from his workplace. He didn't need to open it to know what it said. Still he did. "Pending investigation, you are placed on unpaid leave, unpaid." His chest tightened. Rent, school fees, groceries. Everything depended on that paycheck. His daughter looked up. "Dad, are you okay?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, just work stuff." But his voice didn't sound convincing, even to himself. At the office, his boss sat alone in her glass-walled room, staring at the same letter, only hers was different. Legal notices, insurance forms, statements waiting to be signed. Her company's lawyers wanted her to move fast. They spoke in careful words, reminding her of liability, reputation, and public image. One of them said, "It's better to stay firm on your statement." She nodded, but her stomach twisted. The more time passed, the less certain she felt. That afternoon, the single dad met with a public defender in a cramped office that smelled like old paper. "You understand the situation," the lawyer said gently. "There's no physical evidence. That's good. But accusations alone can still carry weight." "I saved her," he said quietly. "I believe you," the lawyer replied. "But belief and proof are not the same." He rubbed his face with his hands. "My daughter needs me. I can't afford this." "We'll fight it," the lawyer said. "But it won't be quick." At school pickup, parents whispered. One mother pulled her child closer when he walked past. Another avoided eye contact altogether. He felt smaller with every step. That night, his daughter asked a question that broke him. "Why don't my friends come over anymore?" He swallowed hard. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. "Did you make a mistake?" she asked. He knelt in front of her. "No," he said softly. "I helped someone." She nodded, trusting him completely. That trust was the only thing holding him together. Across town, his boss sat in her apartment, lights off, staring at her phone. Emails flooded in. Board members, investors, messages asking if she was safe. Not one asked if the man who saved her was okay. She opened a message from security. More footage, more reports. She replayed the moment again and again. The image of him waiting in the hallway wouldn't leave her mind. If he had wanted to hurt her, why stay? Why call for help? Why risk everything? A quiet truth began to form, one she didn't want to face. The next day, detectives returned to the building. They interviewed co-workers, janitors, security staff. One guard said, "He's always respectful. Never causes trouble." Another co-worker added, "He stayed late to support his kid." Everyone knows that. Slowly, the picture changed, not of a criminal, but of a man caught in the wrong moment. When the detective met the boss again, his tone was different. "We've reviewed medical reports," he said. "They point to collapse from exhaustion." She looked down at her hands. "And the employee?" she asked quietly. "There's no evidence against him," the detective said. "But your statement carries weight." Her throat tightened. She realized something then. Her fear had spoken louder than the truth. That evening, the single dad sat on his couch, surrounded by bills. He hadn't told his daughter yet that things were getting worse. A knock came at the door. His heart raced. When he opened it, a detective stood there, not hostile this time. "We're still investigating," the detective said. "But things are shifting." "What does that mean?" the dad asked. "It means you did the right thing by talking to us," the detective replied. "And it means someone else needs to be honest now." The door closed. Hope flickered for the first time. In her apartment, his boss stood by the window, city lights glowing below. She held her phone, staring at the number saved there. She had avoided this call for days. Finally, she pressed dial. When he answered, silence filled the line. She said, her voice shaking. "I think I made a mistake." His breath caught. That one sentence carried more weight than any accusation. The phone call ended, but the silence stayed. The single dad sat on the edge of his couch, phone still in his hand. His heart was pounding. He had waited days to hear those words, but now that they were spoken, he didn't know how to feel. "I think I made a mistake." That sentence didn't erase what had happened. It didn't give him his job back. It didn't undo the looks, the whispers, or the fear his daughter had felt. But it meant the truth was finally trying to breathe. The next morning, his boss walked into the police station on her own. No lawyers, no assistants. Just her. She sat across from the detective and folded her hands tightly. Her voice shook when she spoke. "I wasn't attacked," she said. "I collapsed. I was exhausted. And I panicked when I woke up." The detective didn't interrupt. "I saw him near me," she continued. "My mind filled in the rest. I let fear decide instead of facts." She swallowed hard. "He saved my life." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then the detective nodded and closed his notebook. When the single dad got the call, he was standing in line at a discount grocery store, counting cash carefully. "You're cleared," the detective said. "Cleared." His knees nearly gave out. "What about the arrest?" he asked. "It's being corrected," the detective replied. "The record will reflect the full story." He hung up and stepped outside, the cold air hitting his face. For the first time in weeks, he breathed without pain in his chest. But relief came mixed with something else. Anger. At home, his daughter noticed it immediately. "Did something good happen?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Something important." She smiled and hugged him. "I knew you didn't do anything bad." Her faith broke him more than the accusation ever had. Back at the office, the company held an emergency meeting. Human resources, legal teams, board members. They spoke in calm, polished voices about misunderstandings and revised statements. They talked about how quickly situations can escalate. They never talked about the man who lost weeks of pay. His boss sat quietly through it all. She had never felt smaller in that room. That afternoon, she asked to meet him. He agreed, but only in a public place. They sat across from each other at a small cafe. People talked and laughed around them, unaware of the weight sitting at that table. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. What I did was wrong. He looked at her, really looked at her. You believed I could hurt you, he said calmly. That's what hurts. Tears filled her eyes. I was scared. So was I, he replied. But I didn't get to choose what happened next. She nodded. I know I can't undo it. But I want to fix what I can, he leaned back. My daughter watched me disappear for days. I lost my income, my name. Silence fell between them. What do you want? She asked quietly. He thought for a long moment. The truth, he said. Publicly. Not quietly. The next day, the company released a statement, not a vague one, a clear one. It explained the medical findings. It acknowledged the false accusation. It confirmed that the employee had acted responsibly and saved a life. Some people apologized. Some stayed quiet. But the story changed. Still, damage doesn't disappear just because the truth arrives. The single dad returned to work, but things weren't the same. Trust takes time. Healing takes longer. At night, he still woke up worried about the future. But his daughter slept peacefully again, and that mattered most. His boss stood in her office one evening, watching him leave on time for once. She had learned something the hard way. Power doesn't protect you from being wrong. And fear, when left unchecked, can destroy the very people who do good. She picked up her phone and typed a message to the board. Effective immediately, it read. I'm stepping down from my role. She pressed send. Across town, the single dad helped his daughter with homework. She looked up and said, Dad? Yes? Are we going to be okay now? He smiled softly. Yes, we are. He didn't know what the future held. But he knew this. Doing the right thing still mattered. Even when the cost was high. The truth was out, but it didn't land the way the single dad expected. Some people apologized. Others acted like nothing had happened. A few avoided him completely, as if the story itself made them uncomfortable. At work, he was back at his desk, but the atmosphere felt different. Conversations stopped when he walked by. Meetings felt tense. No one said it out loud, but he could feel it. People remembered the accusation more than the correction. He kept his head down and did his job. That was all he had ever wanted to do. At home, life was quieter. His daughter laughed again. She slept through the night. She stopped asking why people whispered. But sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, she stared at him like she was making sure he was really there. That look stayed with him. One afternoon, a reporter showed up outside the building. The single dad saw her through the window, holding a microphone, camera crew behind her. His heart raced. The company issued a short response. No interviews, no names. But later that evening, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I believe you. I went through something similar, then another. You did the right thing. Don't let them erase that. He read them slowly, feeling something he hadn't felt in weeks. Support. His boss watched the coverage from home. The story had shifted. Not completely, but enough. Some outlets talked about stress and workplace pressure. Others talked about how quickly assumptions can destroy lives. And some talked about him. The man who stayed. The man who called for help. The man who lost everything before the truth arrived. She closed her laptop, tears filling her eyes. Her apology had been real, but it felt small compared to the damage. The next week, the single dad attended a school meeting. At first, he hesitated to go. He didn't want more eyes on him, but his daughter squeezed his hand. Please, she said. So he went. During the meeting, another parent spoke up. I just want to say something, the woman said, glancing toward him. I judged someone without knowing the full story once. I regret it every day. She looked at him. I'm sorry. The room went quiet. Then another parent nodded. Then another. It wasn't loud. But it was real. Later that night, his boss requested one final meeting. This time, she didn't sit across from him like a superior. She sat beside him. I'm stepping away from leadership, she said. Not to escape, but because I need to own what happened. He listened without interrupting. "I've arranged for compensation," she added, "not as payment for silence. As acknowledgement of harm." He considered it carefully. "This doesn't fix everything," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I hope it helps." He nodded slowly. "It helps my daughter," he said. "So I'll accept it." Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Some doors stayed closed, but new ones opened quietly. A community group invited him to speak about resilience. A nonprofit asked him to share his story. He almost said no. But then he remembered the messages, the parents, the people who needed to hear that doing good still mattered. So he said yes. One evening, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she asked a question that surprised him. "Dad, are you a hero?" He laughed softly. "No, I just helped someone." She smiled. "That's what heroes do." He kissed her forehead and turned off the light. Across town, his former boss packed up her office. She paused before leaving, looking back one last time. She had learned a hard lesson. Fear can lie, power can blind, and kindness can survive even when the world tries to punish it. The single dad stood at his window that night, city lights glowing softly outside. His life wasn't the same, but it was honest. And for the first time since that rainy night, he felt something settle in his chest. Peace. A year passed. Life didn't return to what it had been before, but it moved forward. The single dad no longer worked late nights in the same building. He had taken a new job, less pay, fewer hours, but more time at home. Time mattered more now. Every morning, he walked his daughter to school. Every evening, they cooked dinner together. The world felt smaller, quieter, safer. The story still followed him sometimes. People recognized him at community events. Some shook his hand. Some shared their own stories of being judged too quickly. He never exaggerated. He never painted himself as a victim or a hero. "I just did what anyone should do," he always said. But people listened. One afternoon, he received a letter in the mail. Inside was a short note. "I think about that night often. Not with fear anymore, but with gratitude. I am sorry it took me so long to understand the truth. I hope you and your daughter are well." There was no signature. He folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. Not out of anger, out of closure. That evening, his daughter brought home a school assignment. "Write about someone who taught you something important." The teacher had written at the top. She handed it to him proudly. "Read it," she said. He sat at the table and opened the paper. It wasn't long. "My dad taught me that helping people is always right, even when it's hard. He taught me that telling the truth matters. And he taught me that being kind doesn't mean being weak." His eyes filled with tears. He pulled her into a hug and held her for a long time. The community center hosted a small event one weekend. No cameras, no reporters, just people. He stood at the front of the room, nervous but calm. "I'm not here because I'm special," he said. "I'm here because this can happen to anyone." He talked about fear, about assumptions, about how quickly stories form without facts, and he talked about his daughter. "She watched me choose kindness," he said. And that mattered more than anything else. When he finished, the room was silent. Then people stood and clapped, not loudly, but sincerely. Later that night, he and his daughter sat on the couch, sharing popcorn and watching an old movie. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Dad," she said softly, "if that happened again, would you still help?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "Even if it hurt?" "Yes," she smiled. "Then I'm proud of you." Outside, rain began to fall again. Not heavy like before, gentle. He watched it through the window and felt something shift inside him. That night had taken a lot from him, but it had also given him something he could never lose. His values, his bond with his child, his quiet strength. Somewhere else in the city, a woman paused at a crosswalk as rain touched the pavement. She remembered lying on a cold floor, afraid and alone, and she remembered the man who didn't walk away. She whispered a quiet thank you into the night. Back at home, The single dad turned off the lights and headed to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, he slept peacefully, knowing that even when the world got it wrong, doing the right thing had still been worth it.